Tonight, all eyes are once again on Catherine, Princess of Wales, as she honors the memory of Princess Diana with one of the most recognizable royal tiaras ever worn. But while the world admires the sparkle, a very different question has quietly followed Diana's jewelry collection for decades. Because after Diana died, not every piece from her collection was clearly accounted for. And according to royal historians, jewelry experts, and former palace insiders, one missing tiara may have circulated inside royal circles for years without the public ever fully knowing the truth. This story isn't just about diamonds. It's about legacy, secrecy, inheritance, and the unanswered questions that still surround Princess Diana nearly 30 years later. Stay with me, because this goes much deeper than most people realize. The night everything changed. The year is 1997. A black Mercedes races through the Pont del Alma tunnel in Paris. In seconds, the world changes forever. Princess Diana, the most photographed woman on Earth, the woman millions called the People's Princess, is gone. The grief was immediate. Crowds gathered outside Kensington Palace. Mountains of flowers stretched across the gates. Television stations interrupted regular programming for days. More than 1 billion people watched Diana's funeral. But while the public mourned openly, another process was unfolding quietly behind palace walls. Diana's belongings were being sorted, her clothing, her handwritten letters, personal keepsakes, and perhaps most importantly, her jewelry collection. That's where the mystery begins, because Diana didn't just own ordinary royal jewels. Over the years, she had accumulated one of the most iconic collections associated with any modern royal figure. Some pieces were gifts from the crown. Others came from Prince Charles. Some were inherited, some were personally purchased, and after her death, certain pieces began appearing again. A bracelet seen years later on another royal, a brooch spotted at a state banquet, a necklace that seemed strangely familiar. Some transfers were publicly explained. Others were never addressed at all, and at the center of the biggest questions sits one particular tiara, a piece surrounded by confusion, conflicting reports, and years of speculation. Why royal jewelry is more complicated than people think. To understand this mystery, you first have to understand how royal jewelry actually works. Most people assume every royal jewel belongs to the same vault or the same person. That's not true. In Britain, royal jewelry usually falls into 3 categories. First, there are crown-owned pieces. These belong to the monarchy itself, not to any individual royal. The reigning monarch can loan them out for working royals for official duties. They move from reign to reign and stay tied to the institution. Second, there's private jewelry. These are personally owned items, gifts, inheritances, or pieces purchased with private money. Those can legally be passed down through wills like any other property. Then there's a third category that creates endless complications: jewelry gifted by foreign leaders and dignitaries. Those items often exist in a gray area between personal ownership and state property, and that gray area has reportedly caused disputes inside royal circles for decades. When Diana married Prince Charles in 1981, she gained access to crown jewelry for official events. She also wore pieces from the Spencer family collection, and during her years as Princess of Wales, she received extraordinary gifts from world leaders, diplomats, and royal figures. But when Charles and Diana separated in 1992 and later divorced in 1996, one important question was never fully answered publicly: which pieces truly belong to Diana and which pieces belong to the crown? That distinction matters because after Diana's death, ownership determined who had legal control over every item in her collection. The tiara everyone knows, and the one few talk about. When people think about Diana and tiaras, they almost always picture the Spencer tiara. The diamond floral design Diana wore on her wedding day became one of the most famous bridal pieces in history. But there's something important many people still don't realize. The Spencer tiara was never Diana's personal property. It belonged to the Spencer family. It was loaned to her for the wedding. After Diana died, it returned to the Spencer family collection, where it remains today. That history is fully documented. No mystery, no controversy. The real questions involve the other tiaras Diana wore during her years as Princess of Wales. Over time, Diana appeared publicly wearing several different tiaras. Some were clearly crown loans, others appeared in private events, unofficial portraits, or less documented gatherings. And according to several researchers, not every piece in those gatherings appears clearly in publicly available records after 1997. That's where historians and royal watchers begin raising questions, because there are documented accounts suggesting that some jewelry in Diana's personal possession at the time of her death was never fully explained to the public afterward. Not stolen, not officially missing, but never clearly accounted for, and experts say that distinction matters. What happened after Diana died? After Diana died, her estate entered the control of legal executors. Her will left most of her assets to Prince William and Prince Harry. Some personal gifts went to close staff members, including longtime butler Paul Burrell. But according to historians who have studied the issue, the jewelry process appears to have been handled separately. Parts of the documentation were sealed, certain records were never fully released, and that lack of transparency created decades of speculation. Here's the key issue. Who had access to Diana's apartments and possessions immediately after her death, and how carefully was every piece documented before items began moving? Those questions have never received complete public answers. Camilla and the public backlash. Now we come to the part of the story that triggered strong public reactions for years: Camilla Parker Bowles. Long before Diana's death, Camilla had already become deeply unpopular with many members of the public. After Charles admitted to infidelity in the 1990s, and after Diana's famous Panorama interview, millions viewed Camilla as the woman who destroyed Diana's marriage. So after Diana died, emotions around Camilla became even more intense. That meant every public appearance mattered, every dress, every gesture, and especially every piece of jewelry. Whenever Camilla appeared wearing jewelry connected in the public mind to Diana, headlines exploded. But it's important to separate two very different situations. First, crown jewelry. These pieces legally belong to the monarchy and could be loaned to any senior royal. If Diana wore them first, the crown still had every legal right to reissue them later. Second, pieces believed to have belonged personally to Diana. That's where the controversy becomes far more complicated. Over the years, royal watchers identified several pieces worn by Camilla that appeared visually consistent with jewelry previously associated with Diana. A pearl and diamond brooch, a bracelet with an unusually specific design, even pieces seen in less formal royal settings. Could they have been identical items? Possibly. Could they have simply been similar designs? Also possible. Without official inventories or direct physical examination, experts say absolute certainty is difficult, but several jewelry historians have publicly stated that the similarities were strong enough to raise legitimate questions. What royal experts actually said. One of the most respected names in royal jewelry research, Leslie Field, repeatedly noted before her death that the public records surrounding Diana's jewelry collection appeared incomplete. She stopped short of making accusations, but she emphasized that gaps clearly existed, and those gaps became more noticeable as years passed. Independent researchers later compared official photographs of Diana with later images of Camilla and other royals. In several cases, they concluded that certain pieces appeared visually consistent with jewelry previously linked to Diana. Again, not proof, but enough to fuel ongoing debate. One royal historian even argued that the biggest issue was not whether wrongdoing occurred. The real issue was transparency, because when records remain unclear around items connected to one of the world's most beloved public figures, public suspicion naturally grows. Prince Harry's comments changed the conversation. Then came 2023. Prince Harry released Spare. Most headlines focused on family feuds and palace tensions, but hidden inside the memoir were smaller details that caught the attention of royal historians. Harry described the chaos following Diana's death. He described how little control he and William had around events. Remember, Harry was only 12 years old. William was 17. Two grieving boys suddenly found themselves surrounded by palace officials, lawyers, media pressure, and institutional decisions. According to Harry's own descriptions, many choices regarding Diana's belongings happened around them, not necessarily with them. Over time, both William and Harry received jewelry connected to their mother. William famously used Diana's sapphire engagement ring to propose to Kate Middleton. That moment became a global symbol of continuity, but other pieces were handled far more privately. Harry later used diamonds from Diana's collection in Meghan's engagement ring, and the contrast between the brothers became impossible to ignore. William's gesture tied Diana's legacy back into the institution. Harry's gesture felt deeply personal and protective, almost like preserving a private connection outside palace control. Accounts from former insiders. Several accounts from people connected to royal jewelry services have added even more intrigue over the years. One former employee connected to a London jeweler with a royal warrant reportedly claimed they were asked in late 1997 to assess pieces from. According to that account, questions about documentation and ownership records remained unresolved at the time. Another historian who specialized in royal portrait comparisons later published research suggesting multiple jewelry matches between Diana-era photographs and later appearances by senior royals. Again, not definitive proof, but enough consistency to keep the debate alive. Perhaps the most striking claim came from a former household staff member who allegedly described a brief period after Diana's death when access to Kensington Palace was not yet tightly controlled. According to the account, numerous people entered and exited the residence before a formal inventory process was fully underway. The source never claimed theft, but they did suggest the official inventory may not have captured every item originally present. That distinction is critical, because the core issue here isn't necessarily criminal behavior, it's whether proper documentation existed at all. The tiara that connects everything. No piece symbolizes the emotional side of this debate more than the Cambridge Lover's Knot tiara. The tiara dates back to Queen Mary and later became strongly associated with Diana. Its arches of diamonds and hanging pearls created some of the most iconic images in royal history. Diana wore it repeatedly during the 1980s and early 1990s. After her death, the tiara returned to the royal collection because it was always crown property. Years later, Catherine, Princess of Wales, began wearing it regularly. Legally, there was no controversy, but emotionally, the public response remained intense. Because for millions of people, that tiara wasn't just a royal jewel anymore. It had become part of Diana's image, part of her story. And that reveals something important. Royal jewelry is never just jewelry, it's symbolism. Every appearance sends a message. Every piece carries memory. When a royal figure wears a famous item once associated with Diana, people instinctively attach meaning to that choice, whether the palace intends that reaction or not. William and Harry took very different paths. One of the most revealing aspects of this entire story is how differently William and Harry seem to view Diana's legacy. William's decision to give Diana's engagement ring to Kate placed one of Diana's most recognizable possessions directly back into the center of the monarchy. It became a symbol of royal continuity. Harry's choices have felt more personal, more guarded. In interviews and in Spare, Harry often speaks about Diana's possessions with emotional intensity, not because of material value, but because they represent connection, memory, and trust. For Harry, preserving Diana's personal legacy appears deeply tied to protecting it from institutional control. And once you understand that perspective, the jewelry debate starts feeling less superficial. These aren't simply expensive objects. They are emotional anchors connected to someone both brothers lost far too young. Why historians still care about this? In recent years, calls for greater transparency around royal assets have increased. Researchers have begun examining everything from crown finances to historical collections with far greater scrutiny. And Diana's jewelry collection remains one of the most discussed, unresolved topics. Several pieces connected to Diana have appeared at auctions over the years. Former staff members and associates have claimed certain items were personal gifts from Diana herself. Some sales were documented, others raised questions. Historians studying royal material culture say the issue isn't about scandal, it's about accountability. Where did certain pieces go? Which items belonged personally to Diana? Which belonged to the crown? And was every transfer properly recorded? Those questions remain surprisingly difficult to answer publicly. The bigger meaning behind the mystery. At its core, this story isn't really about tiaras. It's about institutions. It's about what happens when personal legacy collides with royal tradition. Diana entered the royal family at just 19 years old. She became one of the most recognizable women in the world. She also became someone who increasingly challenged the system around her, through media, through public emotion, through honesty. And after her death, the monarchy continued moving forward, as institutions always do. But the unanswered questions surrounding her possessions remain, not because of conspiracy theories, because incomplete records naturally create doubt, especially when the person involved was Princess Diana. The questions still left unanswered. Even today, several major questions remain. What was the complete inventory of Diana's personal jewelry collection at the time of her death? Who supervised that inventory process? Which pieces were officially classified as crown property? Were William and Harry fully informed about every decision involving their mother's belongings? And are there still pieces inside royal collections whose transfer history has never been publicly explained? Those aren't outrageous questions, they're reasonable questions. Questions people naturally ask when transparency is incomplete. Final thoughts. Princess Diana understood the power of imagery better than almost anyone. Every ring, every necklace, every tiara carried meaning. She used fashion and jewelry to communicate emotion, independence, and identity. That's why people still care so deeply about these pieces decades later. Not because of diamonds, because they represent Diana herself. This isn't about attacking Camilla. It isn't about accusing the royal family of doing wrong. It's about understanding history clearly and asking whether complete transparency was ever truly provided. If the royal household released a fully verified inventory tomorrow, every piece, every transfer, every record, would it finally answer the public's questions, or would some mysteries still remain? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if you want a deeper breakdown of the specific tiaras, photographs, and expert analyses tied to Diana's collection, stay tuned for the next video. Because even decades later, the story of Princess Diana continues to fascinate the world.